The year 1066 marked a watershed moment in English history, as Harold Godwinson, recently crowned King of England, stepped onto the throne amidst uncertainty. Formerly the powerful Earl of Wessex, Harold claimed the crown on January 6th, following the passing of Edward the Confessor, who had left no direct heir. Although the exact circumstances of Harold's ascent remain unclear, Edward reportedly named Harold his successor on his deathbed. Harold's formidable reputation as a military leader stemmed from his triumphant campaigns in Wales during 1063 and 1064. Across the English Channel, however, William, Duke of Normandy, was formulating a rival claim. William insisted that Edward had pledged the throne to him as early as 1051. Furthermore, the Duke argued that Harold, during a visit to Normandy in 1064, had either reaffirmed this promise or, in gratitude for his release from captivity by Count Guy of Ponthieu, vowed to support William's claim. This Norman narrative painted Harold as a man bound by loyalty to William. Adding to the turmoil, the events of 1066 were already steeped in intrigue and conflict. Yet another formidable figure emerged to complicate the race for the English throne. King Harold Hardrada of Norway staked a claim to the crown that was as questionable as William of Normandy's. However, like the Norman Duke, Hardrada believed that military might could overshadow the frailty of any legal justification. Supporting Hardrada was Tostig, the ousted Earl of Northumbria and estranged brother of Harold Godwinson. Tostig's brutal governance had incited a rebellion in Northumbria in 1065, culminating in his removal from power and exile to Flanders. Nursing a deep grudge, Tostig retaliated by raiding England's southern and eastern shores before seeking refuge in Scotland. Eventually, he aligned himself with Hardrada, viewing the Norwegian king as his best chance to unseat his brother and claim the throne. Hardrada spared no effort in preparing for his invasion. His fleet reportedly consisted of 300 ships, though some chronicles claim the number was closer to 500. His army, a force of seasoned warriors, was estimated at around 12,000 strong. Arriving on England's northeastern coast near the River Tyne on September 8th, Hardrada joined forces with Tostig, whose smaller fleet comprised about 12 ships. Together, they advanced southward, finally landing at Riccal, a mere 10 miles from the vital city of York. The danger to Harold Godwinson was immediate and severe. With Hardrada's army pressing from the north and William of Normandy preparing to strike from the south, the Anglo-Saxon king faced an existential threat to his rule. In response to Hardrada's invasion, Harold's northern earls took action. To protect their lands, Edwine, the Earl of Mercia, and Morcar, the Earl of Northumbria, raised armies to resist Hardrada's invasion. The Battle of Fulford occurred on September 20th, 1066, near York, where King Harold Hardrada's Norwegian forces and his ally Tostig defeated the Anglo-Saxon army led by Earls Morcar and Edwin. Despite suffering heavy losses, Hardrada's victory paved the way for his march toward York. The Anglo-Saxons were unable to repel the invasion, and this battle played a critical role in the Viking campaign in England. Upon receiving news of King Harold Hardrada's northern invasion, King Harold immediately prepared his forces and marched north. Harold's army covered an impressive distance of approximately 25 miles each day, reaching the outskirts of York late on September 24th. The arrival of the English forces took the Norse invaders by surprise, and Harold chose a spacious meadow east of the River Derwent as the battlefield for the imminent clash. This tactical decision provided his troops with an advantageous position. Hardrada's forces, however, were unprepared for battle. Having left their chainmail armor behind at their camp following their triumph at Fulford Gate, they anticipated a day of negotiations with York's nobles rather than combat. This critical oversight placed them at a severe disadvantage as Harold's army approached. The Norse hastily organized a shield wall to resist the advancing English troops, but Harold's forces charged across the bridge and formed a solid line just short of their opponents. With shields interlocked, they launched a fierce assault that soon extended well beyond the bridge. The intense fighting continued for hours, but the Norse forces, hampered by their lack of armor, began to weaken. The English exploited these vulnerabilities, breaking through the shield wall. Amid the chaos, Hardrada was struck by an arrow to the throat, and Tostig was slain. With their leaders fallen and their defenses crumbling, the Norse army was surrounded and ultimately overwhelmed, resulting in near total destruction. Not long after the victory at Stamford Bridge, King Harold was immediately forced to face William's invasion on the southern coast. During the summer, William gathered a formidable fleet near Saint-Valery-sur-Somme, along France's northern coast. Historians estimate his forces numbered between 5,000 and 8,000 men, including 1,000 to 2,000 cavalry. Drawn by promises of wealth and land in the conquered territories, the Norman warriors were further incentivized by regular payments from William during the preparation period. On September 28, 1066, at Pevensey in Sussex, southern England, William and his invasion force landed. The site provided a good harbor and, with an ancient Roman fort that William reinforced, offered protection for his army's camp. Upon learning of William's invasion, Harold quickly made his way back, reaching London by October 6th, where he swiftly gathered his forces. Recent historians have estimated the number of soldiers to be between 5,000 and 13,000, though the most commonly accepted figure is around 7,000 to 8,000 English troops. These forces were a combination of fyrd and housecarls. On October 14, 1066, the two armies met, with William's troops advancing first to reach Harold's camp early in the morning. Harold's army, possibly caught off guard by the Normans' initial move, positioned themselves on a low hill known as Hammerhead Ridge. William's forces took position south of the ridge in 3 divisions: Bretons on the left, Normans in the center, and French on the right. In front of them, they placed a line of archers and crossbowmen, with cavalry held in reserve at the rear. William's formation suggested a strategy in which archers would first weaken the enemy with arrows, followed by infantry who would engage in close combat. The infantry would attempt to open gaps in the English shield wall, which could then be exploited by a cavalry charge to break through and chase down the fleeing soldiers. The battle commenced with Norman archers stepping forward and loosing volleys of arrows at the Anglo-Saxon shield wall positioned atop the ridge. However, the effectiveness of this bombardment was limited. The steep incline meant that many arrows either rebounded off the sturdy wooden shields of the English warriors or overshot their mark entirely, flying harmlessly over the crest of the hill. Compounding this issue was the absence of English archers. Unlike in many other battles, where archers could provide a source of ammunition for the enemy by leaving spent arrows embedded in shields or the ground, the Anglo-Saxons relied primarily on their shield wall and close combat weaponry. This meant that the Normans had few enemy arrows to recover and reuse, depriving them of an advantage that could have turned the tide early in the engagement. Realizing that archery alone would not break the English defense, William ordered his spearmen forward. The Norman, Breton, and Franco-Flemish infantry advanced uphill, moving in tight formations with their shields raised. As they closed in, the Anglo-Saxons rained down a torrent of missiles, javelins, heavy throwing axes, and large stones gathered from the battlefield. The infamous Danish broadaxes, wielded by Harold's elite housecarls, proved especially deadly, their massive blades capable of cleaving through helmets and mail. The momentum of the Norman advance faltered, as soldiers were struck down by the relentless hail of projectiles. Despite these losses, the Norman infantry finally reached the base of the English line and engaged in brutal close combat. However, they quickly found themselves at a disadvantage. The shield wall, the defining feature of Anglo-Saxon battle tactics, presented an almost impenetrable barrier. The tightly packed warriors locked their shields together, forming a solid wall of wood and iron. Those in the front ranks wielded spears, jabbing over the top of their shields, while the housecarls behind them swung their axes with devastating force. The Norman foot soldiers, fighting uphill, struggled to land effective blows. Every time a Norman soldier attempted to breach the line, he was either cut down by an axe or repelled by the disciplined spear formations of the English. The fight devolved into a grueling melee, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. Realizing that his infantry alone could not break through, William ordered his cavalry to charge. The Norman knights, renowned for their battlefield prowess, spurred their horses forward, their lances aimed at the English line. However, this too proved ineffective. The steep incline meant that the charge lost much of its force before impact, and the closely packed English warriors stood firm. Many horses balked at the wall of spears, while others were brought down by well-aimed blows from the Anglo-Saxon warriors. The cavalry withdrew in disarray, and the left flank of the Norman army, composed largely of Breton troops, began to falter. The Bretons, having suffered heavy casualties, broke and fled, retreating chaotically down the hill. As the retreat unfolded, a cry spread through the Norman ranks that Duke William had been killed. Such news could spell disaster, as medieval armies often crumbled when they believed their leader had fallen. Panic began to set in among William's forces, with some soldiers already preparing to flee the field. However, William himself was very much alive. Seeing the danger, he acted swiftly, galloping to the front lines with his helmet raised, shouting to his men that he still lived. His presence restored morale, and with renewed determination, the Normans prepared for the next phase of the battle. Encouraged by the retreat of the Norman cavalry, some Anglo-Saxon warriors, primarily the inexperienced feared soldiers, broke formation at the top of the hill and pursued the enemy downhill. To them, this seemed like a golden opportunity to exploit the Norman disorder and cut down their fleeing foes. However, as soon as they reached the foot of the hill, they quickly realized they had fallen into a deadly trap. The flat ground at the base of the hill no longer provided the defensive advantage of the high ground, and more importantly, the Anglo-Saxons had lost their formation. As they rushed downhill, they could not maintain the tight shield wall that had protected them on the ridge. Furthermore, after hours of battle, they were already exhausted, whereas the Norman cavalry, trained to fight in open terrain, remained fresh and ready. Seizing this moment, William swiftly ordered his cavalry to turn and counterattack. The Norman horsemen, instead of continuing their retreat, suddenly wheeled around and launched a devastating countercharge with terrifying speed and brutality. The scattered Anglo-Saxon warriors, now lacking their shield wall for protection, became easy targets. The Norman knights rode them down, their long lances piercing through the unprepared soldiers, while others swung their swords, cutting down the Anglo-Saxons one by one. Seeing how effective this tactic was, William immediately ordered 2 more feigned retreats. This time, he executed them with deliberate precision. The Norman infantry was instructed to stage a false withdrawal, while the cavalry waited in ambush. Once again, the Anglo-Saxon warriors, emboldened by the sight of the Normans retreating, fell into the trap. As they charged downhill in pursuit, William's cavalry turned once more and launched another ferocious counterattack. The second time, and then a third, these counterattacks inflicted devastating casualties on the Anglo-Saxons. Each time they abandoned their shield wall formation, they became even more vulnerable to the Norman cavalry's deadly strikes. The flat ground at the base of the hill turned into a slaughter field, littered with the bodies of fallen Anglo-Saxon warriors. Not only were the inexperienced furred soldiers wiped out, but even some of Harold's elite housecarls, among the finest warriors in England, were drawn into the pursuit and cut down without mercy. After weakening the English forces, William launched a full-scale attack. The battle had now been raging for several hours, an unusually long time for a medieval battle. However, the superior Norman cavalry slowly gained the upper hand over the Anglo-Saxon infantry, and as the English forces were reduced, they lacked enough men to defend the ridge. At this point, the depletion of the housecarls, the best-trained English troops, must have been a crucial factor. In a final cavalry charge, Harold and other Saxon leaders, including the king's brothers Gurth and Leofwine, were killed. Harold's death, according to tradition, was caused first by an arrow to the eye, then by a cavalry charge that knocked him down, and finally by being hacked to pieces by Norman swords as he lay on the ground. The remaining Anglo-Saxons made a valiant rearguard stand as they retreated to a nearby hill called Malfos. But eventually, they were overwhelmed, and William achieved total victory. William the Conqueror, as he came to be known, was officially crowned King William I of England on Christmas Day, 1066, at Westminster Abbey, marking the end of over 500 years of Saxon rule. However, securing the throne was only the beginning of his challenge. Over the next 5 years, William faced fierce resistance, particularly in northern England, where rebellions repeatedly erupted. To establish his authority, he engaged in numerous battles against insurgents and implemented a strategy of castle building, constructing motte and bailey fortresses throughout the kingdom. These strongholds allowed the Normans to maintain control and suppress further uprisings. Only after years of military campaigns and fortifications did William finally bring England firmly under his rule.